Okay. Hey, welcome everybody to the first huddle in a few weeks. So glad to have you back. We're glad to be back. We got good info for you today. We're going to jump into the weeds on some addenda. And maybe at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about business planning if we do have some time. Um, Before we jump into the addenda, I do have an experience I had last week in my office that I think is worth repeating. One of my agents came to me and a couple other agents who were in the office at the time. They were about to list a property. They're reviewing, and this property, I think it's sold 4 or 5 years ago. And they're reviewing the details on the old MLS. And one of the things they discovered that included in the sale were water shares. And so they made a phone call to the owner and said, "Hey, what do you know about this issue?" And the owner said, "I know nothing about this issue. I don't remember anything about this issue." And there was even further details, these are included in the sale, shall be transferred. So anyway, they couldn't find any information about it. And my instructions were that we need to resolve this issue in some way. We need to do our own due diligence as professionals to make sure that we're not about to transfer the sale of this without understanding whether or not they have water shares. The reason for that is if we fail to do this and we fail to realize some potential value for our clients by not doing our homework, that's a problem for us. That's not what we need to be more professional than that. We need to look after our clients, whether or not they care. And in this instance, the client's reaction was, "I don't care." That's still not okay, right? If they have water shares that they own, we should help them discover if they own it. This is part of our job to protect them. And ultimately, after making phone calls and talking to, I think, the water master and a couple other irrigation companies that were in the area, we couldn't find any records of it. And we even called the prior listing agent who had no recollection and didn't know what happened. But the bottom line is we did homework as a professional to establish whether or not these existed. We couldn't find any evidence of these things or that this had happened, but that was our conclusion after actually having done our due diligence on this subject. And the resolution is really simple. We documented this in an email. We said, "Hey, we called these people. We spoke to this person. We discovered nothing. We aren't aware that you own any of these. How would you like us to proceed?" Yeah, that took about 3 days of making phone calls, waiting for return phone calls to figure this out. But that's part of our job, is discovery and making sure we're protecting our clients. So be aware, that's part of the gig. Part of the gig is taking care of people in that manner. And but yeah, make sure you document these findings though in an email or in writing. So if somebody ever makes a claim that we didn't do our homework or we weren't professional, we have something in writing to back us up. All
Yeah,
right.
let me add that there's a lot of experts in our company that have water rights experience. So get connected, ask your broker about the situation, and let's utilize the resources that we have. Water rights could go really, really deep, get very, very complicated, or it can be pretty simple. So it sounds like, Mike, in your case, there was a lot of research that needed to happen. So just want to remind everybody, I've heard a lot of cases through the years, and recently inside the company, we have a lot of experts that understand water rights really well. Uh, Actually, going back when Mark O'Brien first joined our company, one of the problems we had was a green belt and a water right transaction that were kind of tied together, and we dug in pretty deep to both of those transactions. Actually, the same agent, Mike. Actually, it was one of your agents, and this is going back like 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So, all those memories come flooding back. The takeaway here is when you have water rights issue, always talk to your broker about it, and let's dig into how complicated the issue is going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And in this instance, there's only a small handful of companies that could even be remotely involved in this situation. And none of those companies can produce evidence that these things existed.
Hmm.
And no one could, other than there was a single line in an MLS thing. That's the only thing that anybody knew these things existed. But if you know they exist and you don't know what to do not pass go. Make sure you're involving experts because can be messy. Can be messy. So, all right, let's move on. I think both Will and I have seen an uptick in the ever popular subject to sale of buyer's property addendum. I think it's becoming more and more prevalent, and I think for the most part we understand how to navigate that document. I think, but more importantly, I think we may be falling a little bit short in understanding the relationship of the transaction as it relates to protecting our client, and that directly transfers into earnest money and how much earnest money we should be asking in order to agree to this transaction. And I think part of the problem with this is that our clients don't have the perspective on this situation. I don't know that they, unless we educate them, obviously, I don't know that they're going to understand how much they're risking by pulling their property off the market for, say, 60 days in order to facilitate the transaction of someone else. So it's up to us to explain the context of that situation and make sure that we are requesting enough earnest money in order to protect them in the event that this transaction fails. By the way, as always, if you have questions or would like to make a comment, please throw something in the chat so we can discuss it. Especially if you have something related to this topic. Remember, let's just ask this question. How much earnest money should we be asking? And you can use percentages or relation to purchase price. That's all appropriate. How much earnest money should we be asking? And is the amount of earnest money that we're asking for more, the same, or less than a regular transaction? Would you guess? Feel free to unmute or just throw it in the chat.
Hey, Mike, why don't we give them the scenario that an offer comes in, you're the listing agent. Mm-hmm. They want 10 weeks from today to settle, and they've written an offer that is subject to the sale of buyer's residence, and their due diligence is 14 days, and their financing and appraisal is 4 weeks.
Oh, there we go. I love that. Much better. Thank you, Will.
So 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and 8 and 10 weeks. That's what you've got.
What's the purchase price?
Yeah. Now we're looking at this through the lenses of let's do something that's like 700,000.
Okay.
And let's look at this through the lenses of answering this question about earnest money that Mike teed up. Do you have the document handy?
Yep. All right. Let's share. Hold on.
So let me state that again. We're 700,000. We're 2 weeks on due diligence. We're 4 weeks on financing appraisal, and we are 10 weeks on settlement deadline. And you represent the seller.
Angie put in Angie did not put in the comments. Leslie put in the comments. I am a buyer's agent in this scenario now, and I cannot believe the listing agent didn't do active time clause. We have until March 14th to get my client's house sold. Leslie says, as well, as listing agent on a $700,000 home in that scenario, I would be asking 3% of earnest money with some money going hard after due diligence.
Okay, I love it. Let's make sure we first understand that subject to sale. So let's pull that up. Now, a lot of you, probably know this already, but it's always a good reminder. Huddles are for this, where we slow down and get right into the weeds. So this is an addendum to the real estate purchase contract, adding a contingency of subject to the sale, and says buyer's obligation to purchase the property is conditioned upon the closing of the sale of buyer's property. Then with the following language: A, buyer's right to cancel before the due diligence deadline or financing and appraisal, whichever's later. So let's wrap our heads around the transaction that we have. We have 2 weeks and 4 weeks. So the later deadline is 4 weeks from today. So it'd be the first week of March. Buyer may cancel in their sole discretion if the buyer is not closed on the property on the sale of buyer's property, providing written notice no later than the due diligence deadline or financing appraisal, whichever is later, upon where the earnest money shall be released to the buyer without further written authorization from the seller. So does everybody understand that first condition? Or any questions about that? Buyer can provide written notice, cancel, have their earnest money refunded, as long as it's prior to the last deadline, which probably is going to be financing and appraisal in almost every case. So in this case, it's 4 weeks from now. So if we look at this through the eyes of earnest money, does the seller have any compensation if the offer is canceled 1 day prior to financing and appraisal? Is there any compensation for them being off the market? No. So, and are they going to be okay with that? And do we explain that? So in 1 minute before 5 o'clock, they cancel in writing. There's no compensation for you being off the market. Okay, so now let's go to B. Buyer's right to cancel after due diligence, deadline, or financing appraisal, whichever is later. If the buyer does not cancel the Rep C by the due diligence or financing appraisal, whichever is later, and has not closed on the sale of buyer's property, the buyer may cancel the Rep C on or before the settlement deadline by providing written notice to the seller, whereupon the earnest money or deposit shall be released to the seller without further written authorization from the buyer. Seller agrees to accept as the seller's exclusive remedy the earnest money deposits, or applicable liquidated damages. Okay, this one's got a lot of legal perspectives in this one. So if they cancel after, then where does the earnest money go? To the seller. So from week 4 to week 10, that's 6 weeks, the seller would get the earnest money as liquidated damages. Now, for any of you who've been licensed for more than, Mike, let's see, pan up, let's see, what is the revision on this? 2020? Is that our latest revision on this document? I think it is.
Yeah.
2020. So if you've been dealing with a subject to sale document and addendum prior to 2020, you remember a much more complicated addendum. So this one in paragraph 2 is handling a couple of issues. First, earnest money. Who gets the earnest money? Seller. Well, this is a condition in a contract in which it says the buyer has this protection against selling the property, and they have not sold it. So the remedy is not a lawsuit. The remedy is not a suit for performance because you didn't perform, because it's a condition. And the seller agrees to accept as the exclusive remedy. In other words, you're not going to sue. You're not going to go for performance. You're not going to say they breached the contract. You're only going to accept the earnest money. Now, did you catch where it says, and if the property hasn't sold? So if the property is sold, what happens to this condition? It's no longer a condition. The contingency is gone. It's sold. It's closed. So if it does sell in like week 6, it's closed on week 6, and this is sitting here, still unmodified, and they cancel, now what? Suit for performance. Did everyone follow me? Isn't this fun? See, this is why I love my job. Because there's all these layers, that we need to explain. See, we just literally go through it. There's no suit for damages because it's condition, and I canceled prior and the property isn't sold. Now, if I change that and say the property did sell, I don't get this protection of not suit for performance. Everybody with me? Now I go back to section what of the Rev C? Section 16, which says I have options when it comes to a default, right? You're quick, Mike. Boy, you're quick. Yeah, there it is. The seller if the buyer defaults, seller may elect one of the following remedies: cancel the Rep C, in which they would have to refund the earnest money and then sue for performance or damages. So, hey, let's see how smart you are. Where else in the Rep C does it say the seller agrees to accept the earnest money as exclusive as exclusive remedy. If I got that right, yeah. Agrees to accept the earnest money as the exclusive remedy. Where else do we see that phrasing, exclusive remedy? See, when it says that, it's eliminating what we see in section 16 as an option for loss for a suit. That's gone, right? So now all I can get is the earnest money. I can't say, well, that's not enough earnest money. They damaged me a lot more than that. I want more. No, they've waived that right. And that's a protection for the buyer. When the buyer puts this contingency out there, they're saying, I'm protecting myself from a breach of the contract because I made it a condition and a contingency. And what it costs the buyer is the earnest money after that later deadline. But that's all that's going to cost them because they can't get sued, at least related to this issue. Okay, so where else do we find that? You real estate experts. Mike, do you know?
No, I've been thinking about this. I know exactly what you're talking about, and it's somewhere, and my brain is frozen.
Where else does it say the seller agrees to accept as exclusive remedy?
I'm going to take a shot, Will. I'm going to
Do
say
it.
it's the financing.
That's right.
And get their loan.
That's right. Go to 8.3.
I promise I didn't have the contract in front.
Well, if you did, that's okay. I have it right here. 8.3. Yeah, let's go to 8.3. It's the bottom of 8.3.
There we go.
There it is, exclusive remedy. Right in the center, 8.3. It says, if the REPSI is canceled, provided as provided in section 8.3 BII, buyer agrees that all of the earnest money deposits shall be released to the seller without the requirement of further written authorization from the buyer. Seller agrees to accept as seller's exclusive remedy the earnest money deposit. So they therefore eliminate the other legal options to recoup damages. Now, if you guys remember in the really fast-paced COVID years of offers where we were begging and pleading anyone to take an offer, adjusting your, I've got two screens here, Mike, so I just had to fix your view. If you remember, we wanted to remove the condition of finance. And I don't know if you remember Mark and I talking about when you do that, you now open yourself up as a buyer to a lawsuit for breach of contract if you don't get the loan. See, this protection of seller agrees to accept as earnest money's exclusive remedy is the only remedy that they're agreeing to. They're waiving their other legal rights, at least related to this issue. Okay, so they're kind of tied together. Let's go back to that subject to sale. So I've seen in my career probably, I don't know, 6 versions of this idea. This is the simplest, fairest way. So let's ask, so I go under contract and I have a condition of house for sale. I'm a buyer. Do I have to conduct my due diligence? Yes. Got to conduct my due diligence. So do I pay for my inspection? Yes. What about the survey I might want to have done? Yes. What if I want to pay for an appraisal or other evaluations? Yes, I'm paying for all of that, even though my house isn't sold, even though I have the condition, right? So I'm paying for all of that. Okay, so now we move on to financing. Do I have to pay for the appraisal in order to get my financing? Yes, you're paying for all of those things. So now let's flip our view. We're the seller. Now we're thinking about the skin in the game that our buyer has. So our buyer's got earnest money that will become non-refundable soon at the latest deadline, and they have to pay for their inspections. So from the eyes of the listing agent, the things to think about here is how long or how short are these deadlines? How short could they be? And are they too long? Have you noticed that agents, buyers will make that financing and appraisal deadline really long? Yeah, like 6 weeks, 8 weeks. So what are they telling us? They're telling us they don't want to lose their earnest money if their home hasn't sold. That's what they're telling us. Yeah, thanks for the head nod, Sherry. I really appreciate that. Because Zoom is so tough. Talking to this little green dot, huh, Mike? So yeah, that's what they're telling us. So I think we look at countering those to make those shorter. How short can we go? Because our seller may want non-refundable earnest money anyway. So Mike, why don't you talk about pivoting us to the option to keep house on market? And let's address this earnest money. Look, the call that I got on this was our agent said our seller client will not agree to a contingency unless they have non-refundable earnest money. And at first, our agent didn't understand that at some point there is non-refundable earnest money. And I said, how far is that financing and appraisal? They said 4 weeks. I said, well, in 4 weeks, it does become non-refundable. So are we talking about something in addition to that? And they first had to wrap their head around that idea that, yeah, it does become non-refundable.
All right.
Like walk us through that one.
Yeah, let's just read some of it and comment as we go. So, option to keep house on the market or the time clause addendum. Right to accept other offers. Paragraph 1A. Buyer and seller agree that seller may continue to offer the property for sale and to accept any backup offer. Seller, in seller's sole discretion, may notify buyer in writing of an accepted backup offer. Paragraph B, buyer's right to remove condition. If seller does provide written notice to buyer, then buyer shall have, insert time period, days after the receipt of seller's written notice to provide written notice to seller of buyer's removal of the following conditions. And so we have the option to pick due diligence, appraisal condition, and or financing and subject to sale of buyer's property conditions. All right, paragraph C, additional earnest money. In addition to removing the check conditions, buyer agrees to deposit an additional earnest money in the amount of, fill in the blank, buyer shall deposit the additional earnest money deposits into the same location as the earnest money deposits within 4 calendar days after removing the above check conditions from the rep sheet. And paragraph D, buyer's right to remove conditions. If buyer does not remove from the rep sheet the above check conditions within the same time period specified in section 1.b of this addendum, then the rep sheet will automatically become canceled, in which instance the earnest money deposit or deposits shall be released to buyer. So, I mean, there you have it. I think I would encourage everybody to really look hard at paragraph C. If I think, as Will said, when they talk about skin in the game, I think we should, some of the qualifiers for skin in the game are, as Will said, you know, are you doing your due diligence? Are you pursuing an appraisal as you should under normal circumstances? That's one, but there's no reason that they shouldn't agree to deposit additional earnest money afterwards. In a lot of instances, I would encourage everybody to at least push that during your negotiations. Here's a question for the audience. Do we have to have something in writing to actually accept backup offers? Is that actually a real thing?
Sorry, I can't help but laugh out loud.
The one thing I always think about when I think about this subject, and it kind of comes to my head. Oh, sorry, I'm reading your comments. This is one thing that I kind of wish we could separate out occasionally, is to separate out the appraisal condition and the financing and subject to sale condition, because those are really 3 items there that I think we could dissect to make this a little easier. Because, you know, if they've done the appraisal but they don't have their financing approved, that could be helpful to kind of slice and dice that out to make it a little easier. But anyway, reading Leslie's comment, this is why I can't believe the listing agent didn't counter with any of that. Totally agree. And Sherry said, I have an echo. Not sure what you asked. Sherry, I think it's because you have 2 devices on this meeting.
Oh, that's right. You do. Drop your phone.
I was wondering. Yeah, the phone's gone.
Boom. I think that may have helped you. There we go. Yeah, Leslie, I totally agree. I think, I bet if you call the listing agent in Leslie's example, the listing agent would probably say, "Hey, listen, we agreed to those things because we need to sell this property. There's a slight desperation going on." Well, let's hope that's it. Let's hope it's not just pure incompetence, which could easily happen. But let's go for the better case scenario in which this listing agent and the seller are both saying, "Hey, listen, I need an offer. I need some hope to get this deal done." That's fine. Like, it's fine that people need an offer, but just because you need an offer doesn't mean you roll over to any offer. Not all offers are great. You know, an offer, in your perspective, it's great for your buyer, but it may have made the seller's situation that much worse. Like, they may have had some ounce of desperation, and Leslie did such a good job. Well, their desperation, if this fails, it could be significantly worse because they didn't protect their client. Right? By the way, that's what you're supposed to do, Leslie. So, um, but
I
yeah,
think we need to, I think you got to analyze from a seller standpoint. What would you rather have? Would you rather be under contract with a condition of another buyer having to sell another property, which you do not control the sales price of, or would you rather be active? Okay, now then you can go, well, what if we try to have our cake and eat it too and be active time clause? Okay, so now what would you rather be? Would you rather be promoting your property with an active time clause to the buyer pool, which tells every agent out there that you've already negotiated terms that now you have to beat? If I'm a buyer and I'm looking at this property active time clause, first I might think, well, hey, someone else wants the property. It must be good, right? Another buyer is willing to buy it. They have a home to sell, but I'm going to have to kick them out of that deal, which means I'm going to have to really have my best foot forward. I'm going to have to write a really competitive offer, and maybe that turns me away. So every market is different, not just geographically, but price point markets and the time of this year will change. We're talking right now, this huddle's going on first week of February. How are we going to feel in May? Are we going to feel the same way in May? When everything heats up, in most of our markets, it heats up, with the exception of Wasatch Back. I mean, right now it's pretty slow. So we might be a little bit more willing to take offers today in some of our markets and not so much in other markets. So I think you have to ask about that. You have to talk about that strategically. What would we rather have? So we're either active, we're either under contract with a condition to sell, or we're active TC. And if we're active TC, that means we have the option to keep property on market, and we've dealt with those terms. I want to go back to this question about earnest money, because you may think about or have a seller ask, I don't want to be off the market at all unless they pay me earnest money. And if you haven't ever had Lance May's class on earnest money, I'd highly recommend it, because earnest money is a really good way to negotiate extensions. We should never be given extensions as sellers unless we have earnest money. And there's different ways to talk about earnest money. We can either go from refundable to non-refundable. We can either go from non-refundable to released. Okay? If you've ever tried to get earnest money out of a trust account or out of a title company and it didn't happen like you thought, you'll know how important it is to negotiate releasing the earnest money to seller. Okay? So every situation is a little bit different. It depends, again, on the price point. If it's a really active market and our seller has got a lot of showings coming, why are we going under contract with a buyer that has a home to sell when we cannot control that house? Say, well, I really like the price. Great, then go under contract. Yeah, but what if I have to say no to all these other buyers? Yeah, you could miss your market. Okay, well, I don't want to go under contract unless I have earnest money. Okay, so let me ask you guys, how would you phrase that then? Your seller is saying, I'm not going to go off the market unless I have non-refundable earnest money. Not even for 3 days. So you have this condition, right? Let's go back to that form.
option.
Yep, option. Well, not option to keep house on market, but we have
Time clause.
The time, not no. Let's subject to sale. There's nothing in here that's going to give us non-refundable earnest money unless we pass the deadline. So they still have to get financing and appraisal. Attacking it from reducing this deadline down to 3 days probably not the way to go, because they're still going to have a contingency of getting their financing. So is there an answer on this form that we could formulate around here? Probably not, is the answer. Probably not. So now let's go to the Rep C and look at additional earnest money and earnest money section, particularly the additional earnest money. Let me read that one, 8.4, for those who are driving or multitasking. If the Rep C has not been previously canceled by buyer as provided in section 8.1, 2, or 3, then no later than the due diligence deadline or the financing appraisal deadline, whichever is later, buyer will or will not deliver to the buyer's brokerage an additional earnest money deposit in the amount of the earnest money deposit and additional earnest money deposit, if applicable, are sometimes referred to herein as deposits. The earnest money deposit or deposits shall be credited toward the purchase price at closing. By the way, I've had people ask me if earnest money is credited, and you try to find it, and it's not on the front page. It's in 8.4. So without additional earnest money, the only way we deframe that it's a credit towards the purchase price is in 8.4, just so you guys know. Okay, could we take some of this language to formulate this, construct this offer where the seller has non-refundable earnest money? Is there any language here we might use? Well, not really, because this one is triggered after all the deadlines. So that's not going to help us to have non-refundable earnest money. Mike, are you going, where's Will going with this?
Hey, Will, I'm just along for the ride on this one.
Well, anybody?
Sherry says, I'm thinking a counter addendum.
Yeah. Yeah. And what language will you use?
English, I would hope.
See, I love our legal assets for this, but I'll be really impressed if you can find it. But this is non-refundable earnest money addendum. What? You mean we have that? Are you kidding me? Let me read it to you for those who are multitasking and driving. No later than 4 calendar days after acceptance, buyer agrees to deposit funds in the amount equal to the earnest money deposit into the brokerage account, notwithstanding anything contrary set forth in the Rep C. Buyer and seller acknowledge and agree that blank money, the earnest money deposit, shall become non-refundable upon acceptance. The remainder of the earnest money deposit, blank, shall be administered according to the other terms of the Rep C. So we can divide how much is refundable and how much is non-refundable in this document. So that language is pretty close. That may be our scenario. So what's it called? Non-refundable earnest money is the name of the addendum. It's an eternal form called non-refundable earnest money. And we do give the buyer some time to get it deposited, because it's hard to say immediately, right? Because what's the deadline? You can't say, well, they're going to run right now this very second and deposit it. So it says no later than 4 calendar days after acceptance. So we give them 4 days to get that earnest money into the trust account. And then we have non-refundable and refundable. Did you find it, Mike?
Yeah, got it.
Okay. Now, this one we used a lot. Matter of fact, it was born in May of 2021. Yep, sound like that. Remember how hot the market was? We were going crazy. But this might be something that we could use in conjunction with this idea that seller's going to take the house off the market. Look, they want some compensation in order to do that. And every deal is a little bit different, so you might want to negotiate that and say, look, the seller will go ahead and give you your 10 weeks. We're going to go ahead and take the house off the market. We'll be subject to sale. Maybe we do that option to keep house on market as well, but we're not even going to consider going under contract with you unless we have non-refundable earnest money. Okay, that's the point. Because you have to explore, like, what happens if they cancel? What happens if this? We're giving up the best thing for a seller as far as attracting buyers is active, not active TC, and certainly not under contract. Under contract turns everyone away. Now we have backup offers. We even get a backup offer under active TC, to Mike's point earlier, right? Backup offers in writing. Okay, that's really the whole cycle I wanted to go through. I thought there's a lot of layers to this whole idea of going under contract with a subject to sale and earnest money. I hope that's helpful, you guys. I'm willing to pivot to another topic if you want, but that's kind of the journey I wanted to take you on. And remember that we have as a legal asset this non-refundable earnest money addendum. And to the Sharon, Mike, other brokers who are on the call, if we need to modify that a little bit, we certainly can. There might be a sentence or two in here that we might, we could remove.
Real quick, Ron's asked in the chat, does that addendum also include a release? The answer is we have two similar addendums, and one releases, one does not.
That's right.
Will, before we escape from this subject, what do you consider the listing agent's responsibility in assessing the likelihood of the buyer's property selling within the appropriate time frame?
Oh, yeah, gosh. Really good. That's a really good question. That's why I say every transaction is different, every market's different. We certainly need to analyze what is this property that we are now rooting for? Like the Super Bowl's coming up. I mean, what chance really do the Eagles have of beating Kansas City when the refs are on their side? I mean, come on.
So true. And by the way, if anybody's a Kansas City fan, you're not from Kansas City or probably within 500 miles of that location. So
my brother is a huge Kansas City fan. He has been for a very long time, way before Taylor Swift became a player for Kansas City. Oh, I mean, an advocate. I don't know, whatever. And I love Taylor. She's fine. But the football fan in me, Mike, I have to admit, like, I just want football.
I'm with you. Actually, I give all Utahns a wide berth in selecting their NFL team since we don't have a local one. I know. You can do anything you want.
That's right. We could pick whoever we want. If Britton Covey were playing, he's hurt, but we had Britton Covey on years ago. He's a punt returner for the Eagles, but he's on the injured reserve right now. It would be so fun to watch him return, make a good return in the Super Bowl. But one of these years, I hope to see him do that. But anyway, yeah, I think vetting out the listing that you're inheriting, and now you're cheering on. And I think it's important to tell that to the seller. We now become just a fan, and the sidelines cheering for another agent and a seller to make a deal that we can't control. So before we jump into accepting an offer that's subject to, or even countering it with the option to keep the house on market, we want to think about that. And I think you're going to end up potentially landing on this idea of earnest money, non-refundable, if we're going to play ball with someone who needs a house to sell. There have been times, guys, where we've received an offer that's subject to. We come back with, well, here are all the terms if we're going to accept this. And the seller says, you know what? I found financing. I don't have to sell it. I don't have to make it a condition. Sometimes we flesh that out a little bit. So keep that in mind. But yeah, we should definitely vet our opponent. I'm curious. Okay, could we take a little bit, have a little bit of fun here? For those who can weigh in, who's cheering for the Chiefs and who's cheering for the Eagles? I'm just curious. How many want the Chiefs by the way, my brother and my niece are going to the Super Bowl. Yep. And they're there in New Orleans. And guess what they had to pay for each ticket?
Ooh.
I'm not kidding. Like, yeah, $4,300 a ticket. And they're not great tickets. Go Raiders. All right. Well, okay, Taylor. Go Raiders. So Eagles, Kansas. Get over it, Will. All right, good. Well, my brother's like, come on, you're not going to cheer for my team. I'm paying 10 grand to go to the Super Bowl, and you're not going to cheer for the Chiefs.
I will say it's not the easiest. I mean, Kansas City fans are getting a lot of flack.
I know.
Not the easiest.
Isn't it like Jazz fans and the Lakers? We're like, come on, you. Of course you're going to get Shaquille O'Neal. Of course you're going to get Kobe. Right now you got Luka Doncic. Come on, LeBron. I mean, oh my. By the way, just a warning, you guys, the Ronies love the Lakers. Just so watch what you say, because they love the Lakers. I'm just telling you, and they're big Raiders fans, so you just be careful. I've stepped on that landmine a few times myself. All right, I don't know. How did we do? Let's.
We are at 145.
Okay.
So we could, I think we could cover in 10 minutes a very specific part of our kickoff that I think is worth repeating in
Okay.
10 minutes. So
Yep.
let's cover it. So this page, this page that you're viewing is directly from the Kickoff manual, and really what we're talking about is obviously we want you to do a business plan. Obviously we want you to think about your business every single year and set goals. And I want to encourage everyone, if you don't have numbers attached to how many transactions you want to do, what your gross commission income looks like, some type of metric that you can attach your efforts to, I would highly encourage you to establish that here in the next week. I think it's important for motivation. I think it's important to keep you off track. I can't tell you how many times I woke up in, I don't know, May, and I'm like, what am I doing? Maybe I should do business planning. May's a little late to do business planning. I'll just tell you that, having done it probably at least twice. But let's talk about this document because it's really good to talk about your average sales price. I think that's something you should know about yourself. You should understand exactly what your business looks like. You should know what your average sales price is. And by the way, it's so easy to figure that out. You just jump in your MLS, get your calculator out on your phone, and knock that out. And then we can understand from that number how we get to our goals. It's not a difficult math process there. If you do need help with the math, I'm definitely here to help you. But I probably don't need help with that math. Anyway, make sure you understand what your average sales price is. Connect it to what your income goals are. Now, if you want to reach and you want to become a luxury agent, that's fine. But your goals and your aspirations have to start first in reality. And what's my reality? This is where I'm currently at. This is what I've done in the past. I want to be somewhere else so I can build off what I've already done. Okay. I would encourage you to do that and add that whatever you're reaching for, we're reaching for on top of what our experience has already taught us. By the way, as you work through this, so we talk about our average sales price, your average revenue per transaction, you can do that number too, easily by, if you have to get that number from us, we can easily produce what your total revenue was. You take that divided by your gross sales. And then we're going to attach that to the monthly transaction goal, right? That we have to go from the top level and drill down until we hit what our daily activities have to be. So make sure you're doing that. Annual expenses. definitely factor that in there. I know that everybody's always trying to reach into a realtor's pocket, and there's a new service out there, or there's a new this, or there's a new that. Listen, keep it simple, but yes, you do need to invest in your business. So think about that, and have it translate into a daily activity. By the way, how many people, just in the chat, if you feel like sharing, how many people here have written that number down? They know how many transactions they're going to do, and they know their average sales price. Just those two metrics. I'll wait just for 30 seconds if somebody wants to throw that in there. You could just say yes or no. You don't have to give me the number. Though if you want to give me the number, I would appreciate that too.
Yeah, we should know this, Mike. I think at this time of year, after we've all had these meetings, we should know the answer to this. We should be able to just rattle them off. It's a really good insight to the focus that someone has when you say, what's your business goal for this year? And they give you the number and the breakdown and the average, they give you these numbers and yep, you got it. It reminds me of running half marathons and marathons and things like that. People would say, oh, I run. And you go, oh, great. Well, how far did you go? They said 5 miles. I said, well, what's your pace? And they said, oh, 7:53. Now, you're talking to someone who's pretty serious. Yeah. Like you've got your numbers. So all good stuff. I've got to bounce on another meeting that I double booked. So I'm sorry. They just came walking in. It's Mark and I don't know who the other gentleman is, but I'm going to bounce, you guys. Thanks for everything. If you want to stay around, Mike, maybe you can answer a few more questions if you need to. But sure, love you all. I thought this was a pretty dang good discussion today. A little twist on earnest money and subject to sale, and I hope that was helpful to each one of you. So have a good rest of your day.
All right, thanks, Will. We're gonna sign off here in just a couple minutes. Sherry says, Mike, I need to sit down with you and look at my goals. Looking forward to it. Those goals, I think. Listen, if nothing else, I always encourage people to at least have a single page of what their business plan looks like. One page is actually really easy to do. You just list how much time, like Monday through whatever. I encourage everybody to identify the hour of the week in which you are planning your week. To me, that is the most important thing you need to do. I think Will calls it the power of hour, the hour of power. He's got some good tagline for that, but I think it is really important for you to plan your week, because when you plan your week, you're also going to include reaching out to past clients and doing a little prospecting, which, as we all know, it is the number one thing that we need to be doing. So make sure you're doing that, and write out what you're going to be doing for the week. Write out what your marketing plan is, and keep it simple. I post to social media this many times. I send this many emails per month to my contacts. I do this on my listings, whatever it is, just identify it. You can keep it really simple. You can keep it to one page and make your life just that much easier. Does anybody have any questions related to this, or they have any transactional issues they want to discuss before we sign off? And I think we're going to go ahead and award Leslie 1,000 bonus points for successfully negotiating the upper hand on her latest transaction. So 1,000 points to Leslie. I don't know where you're going to spend them, but you got them. All right, y'all. Looks like that's we're going to call it a day. Thanks so much for coming, and we'll see you next week. And hope Joe ended the recording.